I had been driving since early afternoon, covering the stretch between Albuquerque and Oklahoma City for a client meeting which was scheduled the next morning, and by 10 at night I was running on fumes in the specific way that long highway stretch produce, where your eyes are technically open but your reaction time has gone somewhere else entirely. I took the exit for a motel I had stayed at once before, years earlier, which was a single-story horseshoe-shaped building set back from the highway with the rooms facing a central parking area. It was not nice, but not the worst place I had ever slept earlier either. The motel was familiar enough to me that I did not feel like I was rolling the dice on an unknown. The office was a small room at the front of the property, and the woman working that night looked like she had been there for a long time. I paid the amount and she gave me the key of room 14. The motel was mostly empty that night. Maybe 4 other rooms were occupied out of 20-some, which meant a quiet and peaceful night. Room 14 was on the far side of the horseshoe from the office, which meant a short walk across the parking lot in the dark. The room itself was exactly what you would expect: a queen bed, a window unit, air conditioner, carpet that had seen better decades, and the specific motel smell that is some combination of industrial cleaner and something underneath it that the cleaner never fully removes. I locked the door, checked the window latch out of habit, and got in the shower because 12 hours of driving leaves a specific grime that you want off before you sleep. I was in bed with the television on low by 11, scrolling my phone, winding down. The room next to mine, room 13, was occupied. I could tell from the muffled sound of a television through the shared wall, nothing unusual, just the low ambient presence of another guest doing exactly what I was doing. Around 11:40, I noticed the sound from room 13 had changed. Not the television anymore, or not only the television. A voice, a man's voice, talking continuously in a low register that I could not make out specific words from, but that had a rhythm to it that was not conversational. Not talking to another person, not the back and forth cadence of a phone call. A continuous monologue, steady, unbroken, going on for what I realized after a few minutes had been at least 5 straight minutes without any pause that would suggest someone else was responding. I am used to thin motel walls carrying noises that do not concern me. A man talking to himself through a wall is not, on its own, something I would have lost sleep over. People talk to themselves. People are on speakerphone with someone who is mostly listening. There are a dozen explanations. I turned my own television up slightly and tried to let it become background noise. It did not stay background noise. Around midnight, the talking stopped, and a few minutes after that, I heard a new sound from room 13, a rhythmic sound, slow and repetitive, like something being dragged or shifted across the floor on a steady interval. I want to be precise that I am not talking about footsteps. This was lower to the ground, slower, the kind of sound that something heavy makes when it is being moved a short distance, paused, and moved again. It happened maybe a dozen times over several minutes and then stopped. I sat up in bed at that point. I am not a person who scares easily, but I am a person who pays attention to patterns that do not have obvious explanations. 6 years of solo travel teaches you to trust that instinct, and the combination of the extended one-sided monologue and the dragging sound had moved from background annoyance into something I was actively tracking. I checked the time. 12:15. I considered calling the front desk and decided against it for the moment, because what would I actually report? A neighbor talking and moving furniture. Not exactly an emergency. About 20 minutes later, around 12:35, I heard something against the shared wall between our rooms. Not a knock. A scrape, a single long scrape, low along the wall, the kind of sound a hand makes dragging across drywall, or a sound something else entirely could make, and it traveled along the wall in the direction of the headboard of my bed, which was positioned against that shared wall, meaning whatever produced it traveled to a point roughly level with where my head was resting on the pillow, separated by maybe 6 inches of motel construction. I moved off the bed immediately, away from the wall, and stood in the center of the room with my phone in my hand. The scraping stopped. The room was quiet for a long moment, and then I heard, distinctly, breathing. not my own. Audible through the wall, slow and deliberate, the kind of breathing a person produces when they are deliberately controlling its volume and pace rather than breathing naturally, close enough to the wall that the sound carried clearly into my room. I called the front desk. The woman who answered sounded surprised to hear from me, given the late hour, and I explained as calmly as I could manage that the guest in room 13 had been making extended, disturbing noises for almost an hour, and that I had just heard something that sounded like a person pressed against the shared wall, breathing in a way that did not feel accidental. She was quiet for a second and then told me she would send the night maintenance man over, who also handled security issues, and asked me to stay on the line. While I was still on the phone with her, I heard my own doorknob turn. Not aggressively. A single slow rotation, testing the specific motion of someone checking whether a door is locked without wanting to draw attention to the attempt. I had locked it. The deadbolt held. I told the front desk woman what was happening in real time, my voice probably higher than I intended, and she told me she could hear me and that the maintenance man, whose name was Hollis, was on his way and to stay where I was and stay on the phone. The doorknob did not turn again. I stood in the center of that room, away from both the door and the shared wall, a phone against my ear, and waited. I heard footsteps outside, moving away from my door, and a moment later I saw Hollis's flashlight beams sweep past my window, visible through the gap in the curtains, heading toward room 13. I heard him knock on the door of room 13 and identify himself. There was a pause. He knocked again. Another pause. Longer. He told the woman on the phone, who relayed it to me, that there was no answer and that he was going to use the master key. I do not know exactly what Hollis found in that room because the front desk woman would only tell me, both that night and in the brief conversation I had with the manager the following morning, that the room was occupied and that the guest had been asked to leave the property immediately and that the police had been called as a precaution, and that I should feel free to either stay in a different room or check out with a full refund, whichever I preferred. I asked directly what he had seen and got a version of the careful non-answer that I have come to recognize as the specific tone people use when they have decided you do not need the details for your own benefit, not theirs. I took the refund. I packed my bag in about 90 seconds and walked out to my car in the parking lot while a single police cruiser was pulling in, its lights off, and I did not wait to see what happened next. I drove the rest of the way to Oklahoma City that night, running on adrenaline rather than rest, and I made my morning meeting on almost no sleep, but I made it. I called the motel about a week later, telling myself I just wanted to follow up, which was true but was also not the whole truth. I wanted to know what had been in that room. The woman who answered was not the same woman from that night, and she had no information to share, beyond confirming that the incident had been reported to local police and that the room had since been taken out of service for renovation, which she said in a tone that made it clear this was the official version of events she had been given to provide, and that she did not have further detail to offer a former guest calling about it. I have thought about the specific sequence many times since. The monologue with no response, the dragging sound, the scrape that traveled along the wall to the exact point where my head had been resting, the breathing audible through 6 inches of drywall, and then my own doorknob turning within minutes of all of it. Whatever was happening in room 13, it was close enough to me through that wall that I am convinced the person on the other side of it knew exactly where I was lying and exactly how thin the barrier between us actually was, and decided, for reasons I will never know and do not especially want to test whether that barrier extended to the door as well. I still drive that territory for work. I still stay in motels regularly, because the job requires it, and I am not going to let one night change how I make a living. But I do not take rooms with a shared interior wall anymore if I can help it. I ask for end units, exterior walls on both sides, where possible, even if it costs a little more or means waiting for a better room to open up. It is a small adjustment, and it has nothing to do with rational risk assessment and everything to do with the specific memory of a slow scrape traveling along drywall toward the exact place where my head was resting and the breathing that followed it. patient and deliberate, 6 inches from my pillow. My husband Derek and I were driving back from a family funeral in Louisiana to our home in Georgia. We left later than planned, and by the time we were looking for somewhere to stop, it was already past 9 at night, and we were still a good 4 hours away from home. Derek found a motel on his phone about 20 minutes in a small Mississippi town, the kind of place that exists because the interstate exit happens to be there, and not for any other particular reason. The motel was a single-story strip with maybe 16 rooms, set back from the road with a gravel parking area in the front. It looked exactly like what you would expect for the price, but we were not in the position to be selective. We checked in with a man at the front desk who barely looked up from whatever he was doing on a small television kept behind the counter. He gave us a key for room number 9 and told us that breakfast was not included, but there is a gas station within walking distance in case if we wanted something in the morning. We parked in front of our room and started unloading our bags, and that is when I first noticed the van. It was parked at the far end of the motel's lot, an older model cargo van, white with some kind of faded lettering on the side that I could not read in the dark and the limited lighting of the lot. What made me notice it was that its side door was open, just sitting open in the dark lot, and there was no one visible near it. I mentioned it to Derek and he said probably someone unloading stuff for their room and not thinking much of it, which was a reasonable assumption, and I let it go. We got into the room and it was the standard layout. 2 beds, even though we only needed 1, a small bathroom, a window facing the parking lot with curtains that did not quite meet in the middle. I remember noticing that gap in the curtains specifically because it bothered me in a way I could not articulate at the time, just a small detail that registered as wrong without my being able to say why. We were both exhausted and went through the motions of getting ready for bed quickly, and I want to mention that grief makes everything feel slightly unreal anyway, so the specific quality of being in an unfamiliar room in an unfamiliar town was layered on top of an already strange emotional state. We were in bed with the lights off by 10:30. I woke up around midnight, not because of any specific sound, but in the way you sometimes just surface from sleep without an obvious trigger. I lay there for a moment in the dark room, and then I noticed light moving across the ceiling, the specific sweeping pattern of headlights passing outside, except it did not sweep and pass the way headlights from a car driving by would. It moved slowly across the ceiling and then stopped, holding steady in one position, which meant whatever vehicle was producing it was stationary with its headlights on, pointed roughly toward our room. I got up carefully so as not to wake Derek and went to the window. Through the gap in the curtains I could see the parking lot, and the van I had noticed earlier was now repositioned, no longer at the far end of the lot, but pulled forward into a space almost directly across from our room door, its headlights on and pointed at our window. The side door was still open. I could not see anyone in or near it, just the van sitting there with its lights on in the otherwise dark lot. I watched it for almost a minute, and the headlights did not move, and nothing about the scene changed. Then, while I was watching, the headlights went off. The van remained where it was, now just a dark shape in the dark lot, indistinguishable from the surrounding darkness except for its outline against the slightly lighter gravel. I woke Derek up. He was groggy and not immediately alarmed. The specific reasonable skepticism of someone being woken from real sleep to look at a parked van, but he came to the window and looked and agreed that a van repositioning itself in front of our specific room and aiming its headlights at our window before going dark was not nothing. We stood at that window together for a few minutes, watching the van and seeing no movement, no person, nothing. We discussed waking the front desk and decided against it for the moment since nothing had actually happened beyond a parked vehicle, and we went back to bed but left the bathroom light on with the door cracked, which neither of us said out loud was for the purpose of having some light in the room, but which we both understood was exactly that. I did not fall back asleep. Not really. More a shallow drifting state where I was aware of the room around me. Maybe 40 minutes later I heard a sound from directly outside our window, a soft scuffing against the gravel, the specific sound of careful footsteps trying not to be heard rather than the normal sound of someone walking. I sat up immediately. Derek was awake too. He told me later he had not really been asleep either. We both went to the window, more carefully this time, and looked through the gap in the curtains. The van was still in the same position, dark, door still open. Standing beside it, close enough to the open side door that I could not tell if he had just emerged from it or was about to enter it, was a man, still not moving, facing our room directly, even though I do not know how he could have known we were at the window given the darkness. We backed away from the window without discussing it, and Derek picked up his phone and called the front desk. It rang several times before the same man from check-in answered, sounding like he had been asleep. Derek explained what we had seen, the van repositioning, the headlights, the man now standing beside it facing our room. The clerk was quiet for a moment and then said something that has stayed with me clearly ever since. He said, "That van has been out there off and on for a few weeks now. We have had a couple other guests mention it and asked if we wanted him to call the county sheriff's office because the motel itself did not have any security staff on site at night." We said yes immediately. He said he would call and that we should keep our door locked and stay away from the windows until someone arrived. The wait for the sheriff's deputy was harder than I can easily describe. We sat on the bed furthest from the window with the bathroom lights still on and listened to the room and the parking lot beyond it, and at one point, maybe 15 minutes into the wait, we heard the same soft scuffing sound. Closer this time, moving along the front of our room from one side to the other, slow and deliberate, and then stopping directly outside our door for what felt like a very long time but was probably less than a minute. Neither of us spoke during that minute. We sat completely still and listened to nothing, no further sound, just the specific silence of someone standing on the other side of a door that you know is locked, but that does not feel like enough. The sound moved away after that, back in the direction it had come from, and a few minutes later we saw, through the gap in the curtains, headlights sweeping across the lot in a different pattern than before, an actual vehicle moving rather than one sitting still, and we realized it was a sheriff's cruiser pulling into the lot. We did not go outside. We watched through the window as the deputy got out and walked the lot with a flashlight, checking the van, which was still parked in its position in front of our room. Door still open. He spent a long time at the van specifically, his flashlight beam going into the open side door for what felt like much longer than a casual check would require. He then walked to several other rooms, presumably checking if anyone else had seen anything, before coming to our door and knocking. We let him in and gave our account. He told us the van had no plates, front or back, which he found unusual enough to note specifically, and that there was no one inside it or in the immediate vicinity when he arrived. He said he would have the van towed and would file a report, and he gave us a case number and his name. He also told us, in the careful professional way that I have come to recognize from other accounts like this one, that this was not the first complaint about unusual activity at this specific motel, and that he would recommend, if we were not opposed to it, finding alternate accommodation for what remained of the night. We took that recommendation. We packed in under 5 minutes and Derek went to settle up at the front desk while I waited in the car with the doors locked, watching the lot, watching for any sign of the man we had seen standing beside the van. We did not see him again. We drove the remaining 4 hours home without stopping, arriving as the sun was coming up, both of us completely exhausted and completely unwilling to discuss going back to sleep in a motel room of any kind for the rest of that trip cycle. I called the sheriff's office about 10 days later using the case number the deputy had given us, mostly because I could not stop thinking about it and needed something resembling closure. The records clerk I spoke with confirmed the van had been towed and impounded and that the registration on it had come back to an address that, when officers attempted to follow up, did not correspond to any current resident, the address itself vacant. No one had come to claim the vehicle. She could not tell me anything about the man we had described. Seeing beside it, no further information had been developed, and the file remained open but inactive. I think about that open side door more than almost any other detail of that night. A van with no plates, parked and changing positions in a small-town motel lot for weeks according to the clerk. Its side door left open in a way that made no practical sense for a vehicle that was supposedly just sitting there, and a man who appeared beside it only after the headlights had gone dark, As though the darkness itself had been a signal for something to begin, we never learned what that something was. I am genuinely relieved that we did not stay long enough to find out, and I think about that gap in the curtains that I noticed and could not explain my discomfort with on the night we checked in, and I wonder now if some part of me understood, before anything had actually happened, exactly how much that gap was going to matter before the night was over. I travel for work and sell agricultural equipment across Dakota, which means I spend a lot of nights in small town motels that exist for exactly one reason: the highway running past them. This happened to me last spring in a town in western South Dakota, which was very small, with maybe 800 people living there, and one motel that had clearly been built sometime in the 70s and not meaningfully updated since. I checked in around 9 after a long day of client visits, paid the older woman at the desk in cash, and got a key for room 6, end unit, which I always prefer because it only has neighbors on one side. The motel was a single row of rooms facing a gravel lot, maybe 10 rooms total, and only 2 other vehicles in the lot when I pulled in. My room was basic in the specific way these places always are, but clean enough, and I was tired enough that I did not pay much attention to anything beyond getting my bag inside and finding the outlet for my phone charger. I noticed, without thinking much of it, that the room shared a thin connecting door with room 7 next door. The kind that motels build so they can convert 2 rooms into a suite if a family needs it, locked from both sides with a simple bolt, mine engaged. I was in bed by 10:30 with the television on low. Around 11, I heard someone enter room 7. A car door, footsteps on the gravel, a key in the lock. Normal motel sounds. I did not think anything of it until about 20 minutes later, when I heard, very faintly through that connecting door, the sound of someone moving a piece of furniture, a slow dragging sound, followed by silence, and then it happening again from a slightly different position. I assumed they were rearranging the room, which people do for reasons I do not need to understand, and I put my headphones in and tried to sleep. I woke up sometime after midnight to the sound of the connecting door's bolt. Not someone trying the door from my side. I had not moved. The sound was the specific mechanical click of a bolt being tested from the other side, room 7's side. Someone checking whether my door was locked the same way you might check any door, quietly, deliberately, twice in succession, with a pause between. I lay completely still in the dark and stared at that connecting door, maybe 8 feet from the foot of my bed, and I did not move or make a sound for what felt like a very long time. The bolt did not move again. I did not hear footsteps moving away. I did not hear anything at all from room 7 for the rest of that night. No television, no further sound, nothing, which somehow felt worse than if I had heard something, because it meant whoever was in there was either asleep or was sitting just as still and just as quiet on the other side of that door as I was on mine. I did not sleep again that night. I sat up with the lamp on and my own door deadbolted and the desk chair wedged under the connecting door handle for good measure, and I watched the clock until 5 in the morning when I decided that was close enough to a reasonable hour to just leave. I packed in the dark, as quietly as I could manage, and I checked out through a night drop box rather than waking the desk clerk, and I sat in my truck in the lot for a minute looking at room 7's window, curtains drawn, no light, no sound, no car parked outside it that I could identify as belonging to whoever had checked in there at 11 the night before. I do not know who was in that room or why they tested my connecting door at midnight and then went completely silent for the rest of the night. I have stayed in dozens of motels since, and I have gotten into the habit of asking specifically for a room with no connecting door at all, even if it means a worse room or a longer wait, because the thing I keep coming back to about that night is not the sound of the bolt being tested. It is the silence that came after it, total and unbroken, from someone I knew for a fact was still in that room, choosing, for reasons I will never know, not to make a single sound for the rest of the night.